Welcome back to Meet the Press Now. We are live here in Battleground, Arizona. As you heard at the start of the show, our panel of independent Arizona voters was very wary of the direction of the GOP, but they're also not yet sold on the Democratic Party. Take a listen. None of you are ready to identify as Democrats. Why?
There are a lot of components of, the Democratic Party's agenda that I really agree with. But I hesitate to jump into anyone's side because extremism is happening on both sides.
What could the Democrats do to persuade you to become a member of their party? What do they need to do? How would they need to reform?
I agree with what Amy had mentioned about the extremism. So that's my biggest concern with the Democratic Party, is that there are some factions there too. So like everything in life, it could go either way. And if we're not careful, and if they're not careful, that party is not careful, I think they can find themselves in the same situation.
Joined now by the Democratic nominee for Arizona Secretary of State, which, by the way, in this state is basically the next in line for governor. And if you're wondering, that's how Jan Brewer became governor. I believe it's how Bruce Babbitt became governor, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, joining me now is that nominee for Secretary of State, Adrian Fontes. Mr. Fontes, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Chuck.
Let me start. Let's address what those voters said about the Democratic Party. You've been an active Democrat. Make the case to those independent voters about, because the concern is, all right, I don't want that, but are the Democrats going to go too far to the left? Make your case to that voter, saying, look, here's what I'm running to do.
Well, I'm from southern Arizona, and as you may know, south of the Gila River, everybody says, everyone's a Democrat until they get electricity and running water. There's a lot of independence in Arizona, no matter what party you identify with. I would encourage voters to go issue by issue and pick the party that has the most commonality with your core values, because at the end of the day, you're never going to agree with everything that anybody says, right? We are all going to be thinking a little bit differently on this issue or that issue. But at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. We want government to work efficiently. We want it to work well. We want it to be predictable. We don't want chaos and this wild-eyed fanaticism that we're seeing in some parts of particularly the political right, particularly in my opponent. So what we want to do is make sure to let voters know, look, we're just going to call balls and strikes, make it predictable, winners win, losers lose, and then we move on to the next cycle. And that's really what election administration ought to be about, and that's what the Secretary's office is about.
So what do you think is a legitimate transparency issue that maybe Arizona doesn't do that they ought to do?
Well, I think that there are a lot of things that Arizona does surprisingly well, right? I think that there might be a little bit more room in some of our public meeting laws. I think we could really have more transparency in some of our public record laws, but that requires resources, right? And unfortunately, we've had a legislature here dominated by a faction that doesn't want to spend money on good, efficient government, the right technology, the right other kinds of resources necessary to move things forward and make government work at the pace of business, which is what I think folks really expect, given the technological world that we live in. We need to give that to them, but that takes a little bit of time and effort and money. We'd like to get there.
You were telling me earlier, hey, I'm a happy warrior. But happy warriors don't always say the following. A lot of times people say this is the most important election ever. I don't tell people that. I tell people that this is possibly the last election ever.
Well, we've seen what...
I mean, that's dark.
Well, it is dark, but we've seen what the Supreme Court did to Roe v. Wade. 50 years of precedent down the tubes. A fundamental right down the tubes in a heartbeat. They said it was stare decisis. What are they going to say about the Voting Rights Act starting the first Monday in October? This Supreme Court acted in a vindictive way, and we've got to be careful about that because the Voting Rights Act could be next. Here's what we need to do. We, the people, need to take it into our own hands here in Arizona and in states across the country and say, we want to choose our path, and our path includes inclusiveness, access to the ballot, making sure every secure vote counts, and just being fair.
This, call it a virus of believing in election denialism, can you cure it with facts? Can you, or do you think some people don't want to hear what the truth is?
Look, the John Birch Society has been around for a long, long, long time, and it's morphed into all kinds of weird things. We've got some new stuff, the Oath Keepers and all kinds of other stuff, flat earthers, you pick it. It happens. This is America. People can think what they want to think. But as long as the vast majority of us still believe in the same truths and we still understand the same facts as facts, we're going to be okay. I have great faith in the American public. I have great faith in Arizona's voters. I wouldn't be running if I didn't.
It is striking that the person, you had been essentially the same job for Maricopa County. Is that
more or less.
recorder of deeds?
Yeah,
I mean,
more or
there's
less.
different aspects to it. The person that defeated you, a Republican, has basically become his own version of a bulwark against conspiracy theorists.
Yep.
Just walk us through. I mean, this is somebody that you campaigned vigorously against.
And he campaigned vigorously against me and the program that I built.
And yet but there is sort of a sense of, hey, this is how the system works well. Here's two people that vigorously campaigned against each other, but the facts have remained the same, and he saw the facts the same way you did.
Well, he saw the facts the same way I did once he actually saw the facts. Once he got into office and he figured it out. This is what I want to do as Secretary of State. I want to invite the denialists into election offices around the state. Let them see the people who are actually running the elections. Let them actually learn about the systems without the conspiracies, just the facts. And I think just like Stephen Richer, who's an earnest guy and he's doing a great job after having politically defeated me, he's backed up my program and bolstered the program that I built here in Maricopa County that ran so well in 2020. And I think we can do that with more folks. Again, the truth will prevail. And if we don't believe in that, then we are lost. But I think we do. I think we believe in that.
The other thing that came through with my panel of independent voters is that they feel pretty disenfranchised for this reason, right? That's a closed primary system. You know, here you have a state that really is a third, a third, a third.
Sure.
And yet the third of independents don't get to participate in some of these nominating contests. We know there's a top 2 and a top 4 ideas that are floating around, ranked choice voting. We know how Alaska, California. This is a ballot proposition state. Is that something that you would support if it were on the ballot?
In 2019, I went to the Democratic State Party and I said, we need to open up our presidential preference election to independent voters. Now, my own party didn't back that up, but I wanted independents to be able to participate in the selection process for the Democratic nominee because independent voters are voters and because they're taxpayers. They support this whole system that they're really shut out of, and I don't think that's fair. If we get to the point where we can have a robust conversation about open primaries, for example, I think that's a conversation that I'd love to be able to host as Secretary of State, bringing in voters from all
Sounds like as a Democrat, you're not 100% for it, but you understand why independents would like to see this.
Well, no, I can't say that I'm not for it. I just don't know enough about what it'll look like. There's a whole bunch of different models out there. So as an election administrator, I can say, yeah, we can do it, but I also know there's 5 different really popular formulas for ranked choice voting. There's a lot of math there. But as an election administration professional, I already know those questions to ask. So I'm willing to say, let's have the conversation. Let's see what it could look like in Arizona. I'd be willing to host that. Now, there's some people in my party that don't like that.
No, I mean,
there's some people in the Republican Party that don't like that.
But the farther to the left or right you are, the harder it will be to win primaries that allow the independents in.
Well, you look, at the end of the day, independents are more than a third of our voters right now in Maricopa County. In fact, they're 3 or 4 points ahead of Democrats and maybe even up to a point ahead of Republicans right now. So we've got to pay attention to the reality out there on the ground. Government has to be responsive to the public, and this may very well be a way that we can do that.
Adrian Fontes, the Democratic nominee for Secretary of State. And, you know, I got to quickly ask, how do you prepare to be governor? Is that something you do, or you just, that's what the Constitution says?
Well,
because it is the number 2 slot.
You got to make sure and do your homework. There's a whole bunch of stuff that has nothing to do with the Secretary's office. I do a lot of reading at night, Chuck.
I bet you do. Well, stay safe on the trail.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right, we got a lot more ahead.